Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Real Talks. I'm your host, David Steele. I hope everybody is having a fantastic weekend. So, lots of good things going on this weekend, including the re release of one film that's been out for 40 years, and that was Return of the Jedi. I hope if you haven't seen this film or don't know about this film or whatever it may be, that you had a chance to experience it in theaters. um, it's a masterpiece on so many different levels. You can go back and watch my video I just did on it yesterday, because 40 years later it still holds up and it's amazing. So, you know, talking about anniversaries, talking about re-releases and everything else. Now I know what I said. Okay, I said that I was going to do it on both Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame, but I'm going to wait till next year to do an Endgame when that turns 5. But I thought I would do a re-release on something that was it's still one of the best films and it holds up even 5 years later. And I think that itself shows what it's all about. And I'm talking about Avengers: Infinity War. This movie, on so many different levels, is so very good. We always talk about movies and how much money they make, and I'm going to get into all the numbers because there's broken records 10 times over. But we always talk about movies that have gotten records. We always talk about how much, I'm guilty of this because it is a business, and I always say that. And we talk about how much movie money a movie's made and everything else. And I'm going to get into a couple of points here in a few minutes about what this movie is not only meant to cinema itself, but the MCU. I mean, and I say we as a movie going public, have really been treated and experienced to these kind of films, these really, 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 really good kind of films. And this was the first time. So back in 2008, Marvel Studios really began with Iron Man, and it's gone on since. They've made billions of dollars, told really good stories for heroes and everything else. And I put this, everybody has a top 5, top 7 MCU. This is right up there. And there's a couple of reasons why this was so successful. And everybody has stories about films, right? And I think that this movie, just like any other MCU film, could have been your introduction. Hopefully it wasn't. You hopefully knew what was going on, you've been following the story and everything else. And it really goes back to, 10 years, even 10 years prior to that, and the Avengers. When this happened in 08 with Iron Man, and then we had Thor, and we had Captain America, the first Avenger, we didn't know if there was ever going to be the Avengers. And when the Avengers first came out, that was really my introduction to it. I went back later on, watched all those films I was just mentioning. The Avengers was my introduction, and it was amazing. Not only because of what it did, okay, but because of the significance of it. And the reason I say that is because the Avengers, back in 2012, okay, was the very first movie to make $200 million opening weekend. Now we think about that as a benchmark, very first film to make $200 million. And the only film to ever make $100 million. And Marvel introduced us to not only the characters, villains, but we got our first look at the big bad. And that is that villain that you see there, arguably one of the most popular villains in, not only the MCU, but in cinema, and that's Thanos. And for a good villain to be a good villain, he has to be having a cause in doing something so crazy, but understandable. And that's what we got in Thanos. And that little turn and that little smirk says it all. And so 6 years later, multiple pictures later, over many, many, universes and genres and everything else, it's all led up to this. So anybody who knows anything about this, I'm not going to bore you with it. There are 6 stones. Thanos is actually after it, trying to take away half the population. Okay. So I want to get into, first of all, the numbers. Because when I say cultural experience, this really was a cultural experience. It changed cinema for so many different levels. Now, I went back and I've seen this film 4 or 5 times. But this was the first time I went back and I watched it with the director's commentary on. And so it was fascinating to hear the writer's perspective and the Russo's perspective and what they were thinking at the time. And you have to remember, this is 2018 when they're recording this. So it's, we're 5 years removed from it. And it's so fascinating to hear their thoughts. So let's jump into a couple of things. So I'm not going to bore you with all of it, but there is a lot to get to. So first and foremost, now the reason why I'm doing this, okay, is because only 3 days ago, it was 72 hours ago, that this film actually 5 years ago was released to the public. And it went into over 4,400 theaters nationwide. Now, when we think about this, I'm sure there's more now, but when we think about this, that's a wide release, right? I mean, that's the widest release you could get. And by the way, I think that was a record back then to where the number of theaters it was. So this was up until this point. This had one of the most expensive budgets of all time. I mean, we always talk about, flops like Waterworld, and we talk about like Fast 10, which will, is coming out in a few weeks and everything else. And I mean, I think that has like an ungodly, so like $350 million budget. And where, Indiana Jones, whatever. This actually had a $321 million budget. Okay, so I should say this. The majority of all of these statistics and all of these numbers I'm giving you, I pulled directly from IMDb. That's my source. So this is credible. $321 million budget. Amazing when you think about it. I mean, some people are saying, oh, it's 250, 270. No, it was $320 million. Okay. And it made, when this got released, it made most of it back. It made $257.8 million opening weekend. And mind you, that wasn't with Thursday. So it did its preview sales. But this is what it made Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, put that in perspective for a minute. There are only 2 movies to ever make more money opening weekend. And one of them just came out a couple years ago. And Spider-Man No Way Home. And that made $260 million. Now, nobody thought that was going to make that amount of money. Okay. Just insane amount of money. Okay. And then Endgame, which was the next year, which I will be doing a retrospective of Endgame when we get there next year. But I thought I'd just focus on Infinity War right now. $357 million. And there was a good reason why, and I'm going to get to that in a couple of minutes. But that's insane to even think about. Okay? Just the numbers, unbelievably. So up until that point, okay, there had been only 6 films ever to make $200 million opening weekend. Okay, now we may have another one in Guardians 3 that's just opening next week, which, by the way, I will be doing a spoiler cast, and hopefully I will be getting either Jeremy Fowler on or somebody else on, but we will be doing a blockbuster preview, so don't worry about that. But so this, as I said, made that much money opening weekend. There had only been 5 or 6 other movies ever to do that. Okay, you had The Force Awakens at 247.9 million. You had The Last Jedi. Okay. I'm sorry. So you had, let me backtrack. So you had Avengers Infinity War, okay, at 202. You had Black Panther. Let me backtrack again. I'm sorry. Avengers Infinity War opening weekend, $191.2 million. Okay. Black Panther, $202 million. And Black Panther has a significant role in this, and we'll talk about that later. The Avengers, $207.4 million. These are opening weekend, guys. Do you notice a pattern? Jurassic World, $208.8 million. Star Wars The Last Jedi, $220 million. And The Force Awakens, $247 million. So, did you notice a pattern there? 4 of those movies, 3 of those movies were Avengers movies. Half of them were superhero films. Pretty significant, huh? That tells you Marvel's doing something right. Okay, these are events. Now, I'm not even talking about something like Civil War that made like $185 million opening weekend. That went on to gross almost $1 billion. Okay, so these are just some of the statistics. So let's move on real quick. This has the 4th largest opening day, okay, of all time. And when I say opening day, I mean Thursday. I'm sorry, I mean Friday. Okay, Friday. Okay, that had $106 million. Okay, and there's a statistic in Star Wars, which I'll show in a couple minutes, about how impressive that is compared to the recent Star Wars films. Okay, $106 million. Up until that point, okay, The Force Awakens, and you're going to notice a lot of these films are repeating. Okay, The Force Awakens had 119 million in one day. Spider-Man No Way Home, 121.9 million, and Avengers Endgame at $157 million. Unbelievable. Okay. That being said, the previous record holder up until that point was The Force Awakens. So, I mean, that came out in 2015. This is 2018 when I'm discussing all this stuff. Domestically, okay? So we've talked several times on the show about films that have, quote, legs, okay? And what it's meant to the box office. So really the 3 or 4 that have really had legs for this, okay, is Spider-Man No Way Home, Avatar: The Way of Water, Top Gun: Maverick, and now Super Mario, okay? And by the way, Super Mario just passed over $1 billion yesterday. So that just goes to show you. Anyways, I digress. The reason I bring this up is because this is the 8th highest of all time domestic amount of money. So the 7 that are in front of it, okay, and you're going to see most of these films here. So here are a few of the top 10 highest grossing films domestically of all time. Okay, you have Avatar: The Way of Water. Okay, that came in at $683.9 million. This is domestic. This is the United States and Canada, guys. Black Panther, which is not pictured here, made $700 million. Now, it's interesting because Black Panther, as I just made mention a couple of minutes ago, made $200 million or $202 million its opening weekend. So that tells you something. It made $500 million over the course of, several months. And by the way, and we're going to get to it in a couple of minutes, you had Black Panther and Infinity War out at the same time. Because Black Panther came out in February 13th of 2018, and this came out April 27th. Okay. Top Gun Maverick, okay, $718 million. Unbelievable. This is domestic, guys. And I keep repeating that because these are the movies, okay? Avatar, $785 million. Now, that's the first Avatar. That's the one in 2009. That was a technological giant, okay, because nobody had ever seen anything like that before. So when you see Avatar, when I, in the theater, for those that did, it was, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. And that's why The Way of Water did so well. Spider-Man No Way Home. I know we keep talking about it. It made $814 million domestic, almost $2 billion worldwide. Avengers Endgame, $858 million. Now, there is a similarity to all these films that I'm naming, okay? And that's this. Opening weekend, as I just made mention a few minutes ago, all of these movies made over $200 million opening weekend. Every single one of these pictures. So that is something to definitely keep in mind, okay? Now, with the exception of Titanic, because that came out in 1997. And then The Force Awakens. So that made $936 million. That made almost $1 billion here, guys. Domestic. So that just goes to tell you what kind of longevity this film had. And it's the 8th highest of all time. And we have a couple films in here that just got released this last year. In Top Gun Maverick and in Way of Water. So it's pretty amazing to see that. Internationally, okay? Because it's not just here, it's overseas, okay? This opened in almost 50 markets, okay, across the world. And it's the 5th highest of all time internationally. So as you see there, Titanic is number 4, $1.548 billion, okay? Avatar: The Way of Water, or Avatar, but it is The Way of Water, $1.634 billion. Avengers Endgame, $1.936 billion. And Avatar, $2.138 billion. You notice the similarity there? 3 or 4 of those done by James Cameron. And that's why I put him, when we talk about best directors of all time, you got Kubrick and everybody else. He has to be, for what he is, whether you like him or not as a person, you have to respect what he's done for the industry, because he's moved forward, and basically the landscape of cinema changed with James Cameron. Okay, because of strong female protagonists, whether it's Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, okay, or you have anybody, whether you have an Avatar or whatever it is, he does sequels very, very well. Okay, Titanic's obviously not a sequel, but you have Avatar: The Way of Water, you have Terminator 2, you have other films like True Lies, strong female protagonists, and he just advances what we see. So yeah, 3 of the 4 films there are directed by Cameron. Amazing. Let's move on to the all-time box office worldwide. So we've talked about domestic so far. We've talked about international. Let's talk about worldwide, because that's the combination of domestic and international. It is the 6th highest international grossing film of all time at $2.4048 billion. There are only 5 films higher than that. Okay. The first is Star Wars: The Force Awakens at $2.064 billion. And it is Star Wars. Okay. And we just had, I just did a Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi video the other day, and that's 40 years old. Okay. So Titanic, pictured there, $2.22 billion. And once again, Cameron, okay, moving the industry along. Avatar: The Way of Water, $2.318 billion. And that came out last year. The majority of that money came overseas. But still, the longevity of it had legs. Okay. Avengers Endgame, $2.794 billion. Unbelievable. And, of course, Avatar, $2.923 billion. So that just shows you how big this movie was in comparison to a couple of these other films. I know, guys, these are a lot of numbers, but they need to be talked about, because we always talk about numbers and say, oh, okay, this makes this and this makes that. But this is worth repeating, because you're never going to see stuff like this again. Okay. So, a couple of things. I want to go and I want to show you the Star Wars picture here because this is important. So, this is for The Force Awakens. Now, all these statistics I've been giving you guys over the past 10 minutes or so have been a lot of them have been The Force Awakens have been in these numbers. Okay. So I want you to take a look at a couple of these because it's incredibly vital. Okay. The Force Awakens. Now, you have to remember back in 2015, okay, The Force Awakens was the first time that we had seen a Star Wars film since Revenge of the Sith. Okay. So Revenge of the Sith was, I want to say, was 05. Hello, RL. How's it going? What about Infinity War? So I'm talking about the longevity of Infinity War. I'm talking about exactly, I was just telling the viewers here how much it's actually made in relation. So I was going through some of the numbers of Infinity War. So, for example, everybody talks about how much money Avatar has made. But when you look at some of these numbers, for example, it's up until that point, there had been 6 films that had been gross $200 million. Now, the Avengers back in 2012, okay, was the first to make $200 million and then $100 million its second week. But up until this point, when you look at what it's done since, okay, Avengers Age of Ultron, now these are all opening weekend I'm going to give you, okay, $191 million. Black Panther, $202 million. And there's an interesting thing about Black Panther I want you to stick around for, because when we see the success of one, we're going to see the success of the other one. The Avengers, $274 million. Okay. Jurassic World, $208 million. It's one of my top 3 MCU films. Yes, and absolutely. So what I was also saying, okay, is that I had watched, because I've seen Avengers Infinity War several times, but this was the first time, RL, that I had watched it through with the commentary on by the directors and the writers. And there's stuff I want to go through because it's so incredibly important. So it is the 5th or 6th largest, and I'm talking about Infinity War. It is the 6th largest film of all time, like all the movies ever made. Okay. The 5 other ones were Star Wars The Force Awakens, which I'll get to that graphic in just a minute to show you, Titanic, Avatar The Way of Water, Endgame, and Avatar. Now, it's interesting because 3 of those movies are done by James Cameron. Now, getting back to The Force Awakens, this shows you how big this movie really was. So what I was getting at when you came in is this was the first Star Wars feature film since we had Revenge of the Sith, okay? And this was almost 10 years. So it had been 10 years. I want you to take a look at a couple of these numbers because they're absolutely astounding. It's the fastest to cross $1 billion at the global box office in just 12 days. Okay. It had the highest preview of all time at $57 million. Okay. It had the biggest debut of December at $281 million in the foreign market. And for domestic, it crossed $100 million in less than a day, RL. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. And this is really one of those films that had legs, or what we call legs in the industry, that like a Super Mario, like a Spider-Man No Way Home, like a Top Gun Maverick, that just can go on and on and on. So that was one of the other ones. So I want to talk about the cultural significance of this film, because this film in itself, okay, getting to Black Panther, okay, I want to talk about this because at the same time, Black Panther had just opened to in February, right? And what ended up happening was February 13th, 2018, and that's when it opened, okay? And it debuted to $200 million. And they actually pushed up Avengers Infinity War. And I have because Black Panther was so unbelievable, and we had just got the introduction to him in Civil War, okay? Everybody wanted to see him. They saw the movie, and then they turned around and they wanted to see him in Avengers Infinity War. And it was unbelievable. And that was another thing that drew people out. So I want to get to a couple of things. So I actually went to the box office opening night. So these are a couple of the little tokens I have. I have the little, it's kind of upside down. But I got the silver one of this, okay? And I actually got the gold one too, okay? And that was really cool. And I got two of these. I picked up two. These are actually limited edition, okay? RL says, I hope Blade does. I hope it does too. He says, oh, yeah, I have that token. Yeah, they're pretty cool. I haven't opened them. So, yeah. So these are the other things I got, okay? I got two of these now. Okay, this is 269 of 3,840, okay? And then I have this. So these are little trinkets I got when I actually went open night. And really, really, I cherish, because it's something that, I always say movies are memories. And those are definitely memories that I have. This was the first time that the writers had said that it was difficult because they were trying to integrate all these characters. We had franchises like Harry Potter and other things, but putting it all together like a puzzle, that was something. So a couple of the notes I took from the actual thing was every time. So when we open Infinity War, okay, we see Thanos, and he's about to get the Tesseract stone, or the blue stone, okay, on Thor's ship. The writers had basically said that they wanted to make every single time that Thanos got a stone an emotional experience. And there is a cut out there, according to people. There is a cut out there that is 45 minutes longer than what we got. And this, by the way, this was 2 hours and 48 minutes, TRT, total running time. And that includes Thanos going to Xandar. And one of the things that the writers and the directors did not want to do was be repetitive. So they wanted to make every single thing emotional. Now, it's just interesting because they wanted to give Cap, okay, who we've seen in the previous films, they wanted to make him more edgy, right? And that was that scene, in Scotland when he comes in and he's really, it's that scene for anybody who's watched the film and, with the spears thrown at him and catches them, and you have Falcon, Black Widow come up. So it's really fascinating. But one of the other things that was really significant about this film, so there was a little something called Movie Pass back in the day. Okay, and there is a new version of Movie Pass out. Probably, I don't know if people have it or not. But so Movie Pass was this business model. Okay, it's kind of like an AMC A-list or. So he says, Marvel robbed us. I wanted to see Thanos get the stone. Well, here's the thing. I get it. But if you're watching, you got to remember, too, it was 2 hours and 48 minutes. It's a long movie. Okay? So it was one of those things where you had to deduce it as a viewer. He already had one of the stones. Okay, you already knew he was a planet eater. Okay, and destroyed planets. So you got to see a lot of Thanos in this movie, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, because the thing is that up until that point, in all of the films, you'd only see Thanos 3 times. You saw him once at the cutscene of the Avengers. You saw him the second scene when he's speaking to Ronan in Guardians of the Galaxy. And then the cutscene at the end of the Guardians of the Galaxy, where he gets the gauntlet and says, fine, I'll do it myself. That's it. That's it. Until we don't even see him, in the cutscene of at the end of Ragnarok. So all of that being said, I get it. But we got a lot of Thanos in this film, which was really good to see. That being said, so MoviePass was one of those things back then that you could basically, it was kind of like an A-list or Regal Crown card, but you could go see this as many movies as you wanted for $9.99. And it's a matter of fact, okay, truth be told, I saw Black Panther 4 times in theaters, and then I went and I bought it. So I remember this specifically. It was like an event that up until that point, okay, you could go see whatever movie, including IMAX at the time, by the way, for as long as as many times as you wanted. This was the first movie that MoviePass changed its terms and conditions. And it said, so the way you checked in was it was like a little credit card, okay? And then you just checked in. So what they did was they said that you could only go see the movie one time. And this is, it was huge because, and Disney knew how big this, because you have to remember they're under Disney's umbrella at this time. Disney knew how big this was going to be. And they're like, nope. So that's when they basically, I think, we'll never know, but I think Disney had a hand in it, saying, look, I want to get as much money as possible. That being said, I saw Infinity War 3 times in the theaters. And so once I used my movie pass, another time I used my points, and then I paid for another one. But it was just very interesting. Subsequently, they made MoviePass went downhill. They're back now, but they went downhill real fast. And so that was the beginning of the end for MoviePass at that time. So a couple of the other things about it was one of the deleted scenes. So if I watched this on Disney Plus, one of the deleted scenes was that we got to see a little more Gamora and Thanos. So one of the really cool scenes in this film, okay, is this shot here. Okay, you see just the juxtaposition of how big Thanos is to how tiny Gamora is. Now, this is the scene where he's on her planet and he's basically he's going after the Infinity Stones, and he kills quite a few of the people. And everybody's scattering, and he finds Gamora. And so that's when he walks over, and he basically leads her away as his proxies, as his soldiers shoot most of the population. And just to see the juxtaposition there of her little tiny finger and his big hand, fantastic in the way it was done. We get to see more of this relationship, though, in a excluded and deleted scene on that film. And the CGI. Yeah. So actually stick around because there is a really cool shot that I want to get to about Thanos and the CGI. And there could be some other things along with that, having to do with that. So that by the way, this is a little grainy photo, but stick around for that photo because it's fantastic. I'll get to it in just a minute. So that being said, you had the juxtaposition, but this was an excluded scene, deleted scene on that, and it was absolutely fabulous. And we really start to do a deep dive, and we start to get Thanos' humility and humanity. And it's fascinating because here's so everybody knows of the shot. Okay, this is going to be to your point. Okay, we all know in Endgame that he kills Thanos, or Thanos kills Gamora. Okay, so one of the scenes in Endgame is when he gets the stones, and so I wish it had been 4 hours instead of 3. Yeah, it would have been interesting to see that today. He says trash is an understatement, especially She-Hulk. Now, I want to show you this to your point about the CGI. This is from Weta, okay? Now, Weta is one of the 15 houses that actually worked on Avengers Infinity War. It was about 15 to 20 houses that worked on this. And this is actually courtesy of Weta Digital. And it's just amazing when you see. So the actual shot in the scene debuted at Comic-Con and brought the roof down. And so when we see this, this is the actual shot we see in the film. And it's unbelievable what kind of how they did this. And anybody that's, and I'm not a special effects kind of guy or a visual effects kind of guy, but when I see this type of thing, it's incredible. Now, according to the directors and the writers, he used 2 stones to do this. He used a power stone and he used a space stone. And that being said, it was really fascinating to see the dichotomy of which ones he's using for which times. And so another reason why this was a big film is because you had never had so many different characters, okay, together. I mean, you had almost 12 or 15 characters, okay? And it was very interesting. So it was a lot of trial and error for McFeely and Marcus to actually do. And so, yeah, it was just interesting. But we get to see Thanos' humility and humanity in this film a lot. Because what ends up happening is, somebody was saying it robbed us. DCU will calculate. Oh, maybe. It's all going to, honestly, RL, it's all going to depend on what Superman Legacy does. So of course we have Guardians of the Galaxy coming out this weekend. Okay. And I'll be doing a spoiler cast for that next Saturday. So stay tuned for that. But it's really, a lot of it is going to depend on what Superman Legacy does. And I think I have all the faith in James Gunn. I really, really do. And I think that if he can do half as good a job as he's done on this Guardians thing, look out. I think it's going to be amazing. But that being said, it's one of those things where we get to see a lot of Thanos. And we get to see, so going back to this shot here. So when he gets the Soul Stone, okay, because Gamora dies. So we first see this. And this is what the exchange is. This is after he does the snap, okay, because he's trying so hard to get this done. And he even says to her in that scene in Infinity War, I'm the only one. The universe needs correcting. And she says, you don't know that. And he says, I'm the only one that knows that. And so when he does make the snap, okay, this is the exchange. Daughter, did you do it? Yes. What did it cost? Everything. We see that he loved her, but he couldn't do anything about it. And they should have kept the scene in the film. They did. This is after the snap, RL. This is after the snap. So you got to remember that. So, we get to see Thanos as a person, not as a person, but as a villain. He's an anti-hero, okay? He has evil intentions, but he's trying to do it for all the right reasons because he believes that, in his words, the universe has finite resources, and he doesn't want it because Titan was like that, yeah, no, that's okay. No worries. But so that's that scene on Titan when, he's explaining when everybody arrives on Titan, Nebula and Iron Man and the Guardians arrive and Strange. And so he's explaining to Doctor Strange how Titan used to be, a bustling planet. And then, of course, it all went into ruins once all the resources went. So he wants to correct the whole thing for the whole universe. And that being said, once we see the really the humanity of him, because listen, I mean, that is his daughter to a certain extent. And he basically had to kill her to get the Soul Stone. I mean, it's his adopted daughter, but nonetheless. So one of the things about it is it's just fascinating because it ends on a tragedy. But I'm going to come back to that in a minute because one of the other tragedies that really happened in this film, and the directors thought it killed it, by the way, was this scene. And of course, this is the scene where it's one of those where we see this is right in the first act, and we see that, Thor is now, the Guardians have him and he's safe. And then this is after where he's going to go get the Thanos killing weapon. Okay. And Rocket and him are having a heart-to-heart talk. And he says, your mother, oh no, she's dead. She was killed. He was killed. She was killed by a dark elf. Your father, oh no, he's dead. What about your brother? Oh no, because of course Loki got his neck snapped in the very beginning of the film. And so meanwhile, Rocket is he has a family, right? So Guardians, everybody remembers in Guardians how they were coming together. Now in Guardians 2, by this point, they're family. They know each other. And so he really feels sorry for for Thor, because he doesn't have anybody, right? And according to the directors, and the writers, he killed this scene. Chris Hemsworth. This is what we always see Thor as this big, bulky, hulky, guy with the hammer. This is the first time we'd seen him emotional. And if you look at the storyline of his character throughout, it's fascinating because what ends up happening is Thor is, as the scene states, he lost everybody. He goes to get the big weapon. And even in the end, he still can't kill Thanos. And it ends in a tragic event. And, you see, he's got the last stone from Vision, and he's just about to snap his fingers, and you see the thing hit him right in the chest. And that tells you how strong it was, by the way, because he was basically pushing it up with his power, and the axe hit him right in the stomach, or right in the chest. And so he comes down, and so he's like, I told you, not to mess with me. And he puts it right in, he drives it deeper, right? And at that point, what ends up happening is Thanos is, he's in anguish, and he says, you should have gone for the head. And he snaps his fingers. And when he snaps his fingers, everything happens, obviously. We lose everybody, except the OG. Those are the only people we don't lose. So if you go back and watch it again, okay, the only people we don't lose is the OG. We lose Black Panther. We lose Spider-Man. We lose Guardians. We lose Stephen Strange. Okay? We lose a lot of people. And what ends up happening is who's left in that final shot? When we see that final shot, when they're all standing around Vision's body, you've got Bruce Banner and the Hulk, which, by the way, is a whole different character arc. Okay? You have Black Widow. You have Captain America. And Iron Man's safe on Titan. So, and Nebula is the only one who's safe there, too. That's it. So it's interesting in that respect who's left to go fight. But this film ended on a tragedy. So one of the biggest things, and this took some serious guts by not only the Russos, by Chris McFeely and the writers there, is so in film, okay, there is something called a plot point called the point of no return. And with the point of no return, it's that spot where you think the heroes are at the lowest point and you think they're done. And they could have ended it there, and they didn't. And so what ended up happening was Thanos snapped his fingers and they lost. How many times? I mean, it could have been considered a cliffhanger, but it was more, as they said, it was more of a tragedy. How many times have you seen a movie end with the villain winning? Not many, or very few. That being said, and of course, we have that last sequence where he's he comes out and he sits down on his stairs, and you see the skeleton there, which is a little Easter egg, but he looks and he just smiles because he accomplished his mission, right? But it took such a heavy toll on him. But you have a film now that basically you had the villain win, and they ended it. It wasn't so much cliffhanger, but they just ended it. They ended it on the point of no return. You have all these people that got snapped away, and they're like, what do we do? How do we do it? And it was just incredible to see. And as I said earlier, we see that the humanity of Thanos going back to this scene again, because he had to kill his daughter. And, because remember, this is the child. This is the little girl that he leads over there. Okay? So you go back here and says, did you do it? And he says, yes. And he says, what does it cost? And he says, everything. We get to see Thanos as a person. He didn't want to do it. That's why in Endgame, okay, he's crying when he has to kill her. Because he really, truly loved her. He truly loved, So it's one of those things where it's just a remarkable way of doing it. And in an Endgame, it's so powerful because you know of it. And that being said, so getting back to the money of it, I think this movie could not have made any more money than it actually did. I mean, this movie made because had this come out after the pandemic, there's no way it makes as much money as it does. And of course, next year I will be doing, when it turns 5, okay, I will be doing Avengers Endgame and the significance it had on not only the MCU, but cinema itself. And, getting back to that thing about the snap, we also have one other thing, and that's the end credit scene, right? So the end credit scene, of course, as everybody knows, or they may be aware, is you have Nick Fury and you have Maria Hill, who are in a car, and of course the snap happens. And then you see, so there's an SUV that stops in front of them because that person is no longer there. They get out to investigate, and a helicopter hits the side of a building because, everybody's starting to disappear. And of course, Maria Hill starts to slowly disappear. And then Fury, of course, we see, Samuel L. Jackson do the Samuel L. Jackson line. But as and they said it was a long take, because they wanted to get it exactly right. But nonetheless, they get it right. And he drops the pager. And of course, who's there? He calls for help, Miss Marvel. And it's going to be interesting because, so the Marvels, okay, which we know now, made $1.1 billion. The Miss Marvel show on Disney Plus is one of the highest watched and rated shows on Disney Plus. And it's really, so they moved, it was originally supposed to be coming out in July. They moved it to November. That was a really good thing because too much, first of all, it was too much around. And second of all, they needed time for the visual effects. We were talking about that earlier. Like, there are so many houses that work on this. I mean, this is one shot by one. I mean, it takes weeks to get these things done. So you got to give them a lot of time. And one of the big things, I mean, we'll go back to this shot again, of having it be, that's the shot in the film, okay? but you have to go back and you have to really give them enough time to do this stuff. I can't wait for the Marvels. I think it's going to do a lot of money, and I'm going to sit down and watch Miss Marvel prior to the series or the movie opening up. But it's just amazing. And when you look back on this 5 years, because this movie, it's easily one of my top 5, if not top 7 MCU films, easily, without a doubt. Because it had everything you wanted, right? It had emotion, it had action, it had tenderness, it had, emotional things, tenderness. It just worked. And I think that this couldn't have made any more money than it did. No more money. And for the time that it came out, it was perfect. And when you have Black Panther come out and make $200 million opening weekend and go, wow. I love this movie. This is easily, like I said, one of my top 5 or 7 MCU films. I mean, I'll put Black Panther in there because it's an amazing movie. I'm going to put Infinity War in there. I'm going to put Winter Soldier in there. I'm going to put Civil War in there. I'm going to put the Avengers in there. Yeah. So, I mean, those are my top 5. I mean, everybody has their own. But I'd be curious, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Give me your top 5 MCU films. And give me the number of times you actually saw Infinity War in the theater when it came out in 2018. But yeah, so that is Infinity War. And it's just, as far as where it is in cinema, I think, so what I'll say is this: it really revolutionized things. Because when you go back and you look at films today, first of all, it was almost 3 hours, and it had to be, right? But beyond that, this was one of the first films that had such an exorbitant budget. And by the way, they used every dollar of it, and it was amazing. But it had such an exorbitant budget that if it didn't have it, then I think people would have, because you got to remember, this was the culmination of over 12 years, over 20 some odd movies. So there had to be a big battle, and we got it. I mean, for what it is, and for what it's worth, I think Endgame is more of a time travel movie. So, I mean, the third act is where it's really at, obviously. But, I mean, the first act is just a continuation of Infinity War and having to do it. The second act is really planning the heist, and it is the heist itself. And the third act is the final battle. But nonetheless, we'll cover that next year. And it made more money than Infinity War, which I can't even believe. So that's Infinity War, guys. It was an absolute blast watching it again, especially with the commentary on, because I had never done that. So many iconic things, as Meadow had said earlier, you should have gone for the head. I mean, so many different iconic lines. But yeah, so that's Avengers Infinity War. Coming up on the channel, we've got a bunch of stuff. First of all, if you stopped in here even for a couple of minutes, I hope you please take the time to like and subscribe to the channel, because I've got a lot of stuff coming up for you, not only this summer, but for the rest of the year. Next week, we will be dropping our newest film in the Perfect Movie series, and that is The Empire Strikes Back. So, of course, the 1980 classic. I think one of the best sequels of all time, my personal opinion. Nonetheless, that is going to be coming out on May 4th. So check that out. We have Patreon channel, which you can check out as well. It's 2 very affordable levels. One is $5 and the other one is $10 a month. $5 gets you Mob Mondays, and every single month I will be putting up I'll be watching and analyzing, critiquing, and dissecting a brand new mob movie for you guys. This month, you guys have selected The Untouchables, Kevin Costner, Sean Connery, Andrew Garcia, Robert De Niro, 1987, Brian De Palma. I think it's his masterclass, so I'm going to be sitting down and watching that very soon. We have, for $10 a month, we have Rewatch Wednesdays. You're going to be getting both, okay? And the first film up there, I did it. Both those films I did a little while ago, so no, this is in the same set. That is going to be Steve Jobs, Michael Fassbender, and Kate Winslet and company. You've also chosen your film. You've spoken on this, and I'm going to be sitting down and watching the 2001 film Training Day. So Antoine Fuqua's, Training Day, and Denzel winning an Academy Award for that. And then, on top of all of that, not only do you have the perfect movies, not only if you go to my Patreon channel to help me out there and support me there, you're going to be getting that. There's a join button there if you want to actually do that. That's only $2.99 a month. That would be helpful. So the other thing we're going to be doing here on the channel is a Mission Impossible rewatch. So I have sat down already, and you guys have seen it if you're subscribed or even stopped by. I'm doing a Mission Impossible rewatch of all of the films. Okay, I've got the Mission Impossible 2 notes right here. I'll be recording that very soon. And so all of the films I'm going to watch and then do videos on for you guys leading up to, now they moved it up 2 days. It was the 14th. It's going to be July 12th on a Wednesday. That's how confident they are. Dead Reckoning Part 1. So stay tuned for that. And that's not to mention all the spoiler cast, guys. I'm going to be going to see Guardians next Thursday. So a little programming note, I'm going to be doing the show between like 10 and 11. Get the show out to you guys. If you stop by and watch the live stream, or if you want to hang around for the videos, you can actually stick around for the videos. Those should be up around 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm going to go see Guardians, one of the very first showings on Thursday, and then come back here on Saturday, guys, and I will be talking all about Guardians of the Galaxy 3. And then, we're going to be doing spoiler casts throughout the summer. Okay, June's packed. Across the Spider-Verse, Transformers, The Flash, Indiana Jones, all of these movies plus much more. So stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't. If you have, tell a friend about it, because you can't get this much content for free anywhere else. Okay. I think that's it. So, and, I think that's it. So stay tuned. And we got a lot of stuff coming up. I am going to try and get Jeremy Fowler out here from the Wrap. I sent him a message. Hopefully he gets back to me. If not, we will be doing a blockbuster preview show, guys. So stay tuned for that. That is going to be coming next week. And we're going to be going through all these movies and all that fun stuff. So it's going to be, not to mention the rest of the year, because the rest of the year, we've got so much stuff coming out. The Equalizer, Dune 2, Killers of the Flower Moon. I mean, just so many good things. Anyways, guys, that's it for me today. So take it. So do the 3 things you need to do. Take care of yourself. Be safe. Be careful. And have a great rest of the weekend. I'm David Steele, and you have been watching Real Talks. Bye-bye, guys.